on and
Yeah.
back together. Yeah.
Yes. So,
God, that's terrifying. I don't know if I could go back.
right.
Well, at least you won't be walking alone anymore.
No, and
Okay,
she and her friends.
you're live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Ghost Education 101. Tonight we have my dear friend, Lisa Miller-Schnur, and co-investigator and researcher extraordinaire. Thank you for being with us tonight.
I'm so excited to be here to talk about my favorite city in the whole wide world.
And we were just talking, you have a special connection to this city.
I know, right?
Wow.
So my daughter attends college there, and I was going to tell you, for Mardi Gras, she got the best throws from the different parades. Like she got a Zulu coconut. She got Morpheus. They had a great time.
Is she actually learning anything, or is she just partying, having a good time?
Actually, she is. She's studying natural disasters, which New
God.
Orleans is the perfect setting for it.
Yeah, since they're below sea level, and the slightest flood. Yeah.
Yeah, their field trip was out to the levee.
Oh, yeah. I've seen that Lake Pontchartrain.
Mm-hmm.
First time I went to New Orleans, we were at the convention center, and I was like, "What's up there?" They're like, "Oh, that's the lake." I said, "Wait a minute, it's up there. We're down here." I was like, "Okay, let's hurry up and get out of here."
Mm-hmm.
But, my bucket list place to investigate is in New Orleans, and you know what building I'm going to say, right?
I probably do. Well,
Yeah.
There's so many though.
Yeah, but the Lalaurie Mansion. Come on.
It's funny because I that you can only tour so many places when you go, and I have yet to do a tour there, but across the street, catty corner, is the most beautiful antique vintage store, and so I'll stand out and look in the windows and stuff while I'm having my equipment going in my purse and everything, and I don't get anything around it. So I don't know if it's protected, if they're locked in. I don't know. But yeah, it's gorgeous though.
Yeah, Nicolas Cage owned it at one time. I don't know if he sold it or got foreclosed on when he.
Yeah, that one's a little gray, that gray area there.
Yeah, and I know it was on a TV show that I'm not going to mention, a paranormal show that I just not going to mention. Yeah, but I
can't say anything nice. You don't mention it at all.
Or sit beside me and I'll tell you what I think. But yeah, I would like for real investigators to be able to go in there, and that would be myself. But that top floor, oh my gosh, it's got to hold some stuff. If even a half of what the lore is about that house is true, I mean, it's got to be crazy. But anyway.
And before we start, so American Horror Story did Coven's set in New Orleans, and I was very hesitant to watch that series with the theme because I didn't want it to taint my view of New Orleans. And it's not a docu-series, right? It's not documenting, and they definitely took some creative license and everything.
Yeah.
But I think it gives you an essence of what the city is.
Yes.
And I think they did it well.
Yeah, it's definitely a magical place with a lot of history, not all good history, which sometimes makes for the best ghost stories, as you're going to tell us. But
does.
you mentioned your site, the Haunted Librarian. If you haven't seen it by now, you're missing out. Please go look at her blog, her website. It's beautiful. A lot of great information. And I'm going to mute my microphone, and I'm going to let you get started.
Awesome. Well, again, I am the Haunted Librarian. You can go to my website, thehauntedlibrarian.com, and I don't publish daily, but what I try to do is there are things that interest me, and one of the things that fascinates me is just New Orleans. And so tonight I'm going to talk about New Orleans, and I'm going to show the two books that actually I didn't get anything out of for this presentation, but I think are really good reads for you if you are visiting this city. The first one is Quackery, which is a brief history of the worst ways to cure everything, because we're going to talk about some voodoo medicine tonight. And then the other one is Wicked New Orleans, which is the dark side of the Big Easy. So with that, we're going to start, and I am going to go full screen. Yay. And so hopefully everybody can see it. If not, please speak up, or in the chat room, please let Philip know, so that because I can't see while I'm driving driving the show. So we're going to talk about ghosts, vampires, etc. So that would be urban legends, some true, some false, and some of it a hybrid. And so I have this quote by one of my favorite authors, who is a Georgia author, Flannery O'Connor. And she said, "If I had to live in a city, I think I would prefer New Orleans to any other, both Southern and Catholic, and with indication that the devil's existence is freely recognized." And that truly is New Orleans. And that is New Orleans in terms of voodoo as well. So I've attempted to collect some stories or provide some information that hopefully you haven't heard. Hopefully it inspires you to go out and read more and maybe visit New Orleans, because New Orleans should be on everybody's bucket list. And you can't do it all in one time. So go multiple times. So we are going to start with the inspiration to this, in that I have been going to New Orleans since I was a child. My parents loved New Orleans, and I had never been able to get to the New Orleans Pharmacy Museum until this past February, because whoever I was traveling with wasn't interested, or time constraints, couldn't get there. Just it was one thing after another. And so this time when I was in New Orleans for the beginning of Mardi Gras to visit my daughter, I dragged her to the Pharmacy Museum, and she actually loved it. So this is the inspiration where this presentation kind of grew out of, was the museum. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the museum. And this is actually from one of their display cases, Love Potion, Love Powder, because they actually have some voodoo medicine there. So here's a sampling of some of the pictures that I took. Hi John the Conqueror route. I do have a factoid on that on my website about what it was and what it was used for. The middle picture are some gris-gris potion bags, amulets. Over to the right-hand side are gold and silver coated pills, because back in the day, wealthy people like to get their medicine coated in silver or gold, thinking that it would actually cure them faster or better, when in fact it didn't do anything except drain their pocket. And then the bottom left is more of the herbs that they have in the old jars. Some of them actually date back to the 1800s, when this was a working pharmacy. And then the bottom left-hand corner is, or right-hand corner, is a picture of that would have been where the pharmacists worked and mixed the herbs and the remedies, or ground the medicines, and the dispensary type thing. It's a fabulous place, fabulous place. And so here is a timeline for the pharmacy. So in 1816, is like the turning point in history in pharmaceutical medicine in the United States. Before that, pharmacists, there weren't pharmacies really, they were apothecaries, and anybody could open up an apothecary, anybody could practice medicine. And in 1804, the state of Louisiana decided that their pharmacists should be licensed. Would have thought. And so they passed a law where pharmacists had to pass a 3-hour exam to become a pharmacist. So that's 1804. In 1816, Louis Joseph DeFillo Jr. passed it. And so there's like an asterisk next to his name, because if you read history, if you do any researching on history, some of the websites you'll see will say that he is the first pharmacist in the United States. Well, not so fast. he and this other guy, and I have an article that I'm writing on this, and I have it, but I didn't print it out. But he and this other guy actually were kind of like racing to be the first pharmacist in the United States. And so he was either the first or the second, but really does it matter? Well, apparently at the pharmacy it does, because they have this beautiful certificate that has his name, and they list his the license number as being like 00, it's certification number 001. Well, it's actually a reproduction. So he was one of the two first pharmacists. There was a third guy, but he actually really wasn't. And so don't worry about him. So Lewis Jr. passes and becomes a pharmacist, but he actually came from a family of pharmacists. His brother and his dad were pharmacists. They were immigrants from France. So the whole family came over from France. His dad set up shop. He and his brother worked with his dad. And then in 1823, Lewis actually opened his own apothecary pharmacy at 514 Chartres Street. And so it became his building, and it is a typical Creole townhouse, which has the 2 stories. It has a garden in the middle, a courtyard in the middle, and then in the back, in the alleyway, would be where they kept the livestock and the horses, and then slave quarters connecting between the main building and the outbuilding. And so on the first floor was his pharmacy. And on the second floor is where the family lived. He and his wife and children lived on the second floor. And he ran his business until he and his wife decided they wanted to go back to France. And so in 1855, he sold it to Dr. J. Dupas. And like, I'm not even sure if he's a doctor. Like, sometimes I feel like I should put it in air quotes, because if you look online, some people call him Joseph, some people call him James. On the census, he goes by J. He never really reveals his first name in any governmental documents. And he supposedly is a doctor. And so what he does is he doesn't live there. He lives with his mom in another house in the French Quarter. And so he sets up a medical practice on the second floor of the pharmacy. So he's got the pharmacy running on the first floor, and then upstairs are the medical offices. And there's little is known about him, but the rumors just swirl as to his unethical practices and how he actually conducted unethical experimentation on pregnant slaves, poor people. And people would report how there would be this cart back in the back alleyway, and the corpses would just be coming out of the second floor into the cart filled with bodies. He died at the age of 56, 57, depending on where his birthday was in the month, of syphilis, which, what is that? The green pox that hit New Orleans. So he is just fascinating in a weird way. The Lewis and his wife left, and they really are not felt or seen. There aren't any stories connected with them being attached to the pharmacy, but there are people who say that this Dr. Dupas is there, and they've seen a ghost in a white lab jacket. He's short in a brown suit. We don't have any pictures of him, so I don't know if that's clear, but it's just so fascinating. He never married. He lived, like I said, with his mom at another property. He did own slaves, and he just wasn't known as a good guy. And so here is on the screen, you can see is one of the census reports where he is listed, beautiful cursive writing, the census where it's J. Dupas. His mother's name, we do know what her name is. I don't see it in my notes right here, but it is listed on the census, so she freely gave her name. And here is a close-up picture of that bench. And so they really worked hard when they created the museum to have the pharmacy set up on the first floor, like what it would look like back in the 1800s. It actually had a soda fountain. And so the soda that was dispensed there served Coca-Cola, Pepsi, 7-Up, and Dr. Pepper. And then they have display cases where you can see the different medical devices that were used. And then they also have, to the side of this is a wall of medicines, and they do have the cases with the voodoo medicine in it. You can walk into the courtyard as you go up to the second floor, and the second floor is split into 4 rooms. One of the rooms looks like a lady's bedroom chamber, as it would be back in the 1800s, with all of the medical devices and tonics and medicine that would be prescribed to a woman. There's a huge eyeglass collection. There is primitive surgery equipment. I mean, it's more than a pharmacy museum. It actually really is a museum of medicine, and it is fabulous. Because of COVID, there aren't tours, but you can go through it, and the docents are really nice. And it's just this, it's just so unassuming when you walk by it. It does have limited hours because of the, I mean, it's not, it doesn't have a lot of foot traffic as some of the bigger types of tourist attractions or historic buildings in New Orleans. So the hours are limited, the days and everything, but it was just, oh gosh, it was just so fabulous. I can't really ooh and ah about it enough. But how it became a museum, though, is kind of crazy, weird in a way. So when Lewis and his wife sold it, it was a thriving business. And when Dupas died, it actually fell into ruin. And so the city actually bought it, because what happened was, it was 1855, sold to Dupas, and then he died in 1867. And then in 1937, it went into a liquidation sale. So Interstate Trust and Banking went into liquidation. So it was sold. So it was foreclosed upon. And the building was actually donated to the city of New Orleans in 1940. And so the city had this building, and they were like, what are we going to do with it? Well, being that records really weren't that well taken care of back in the day, there was this rumor swirling, not that it was the pharmacy of possibly the first pharmacist in the United States, but it was the place that Napoleon was going to stay at when he came to New Orleans. And so it became known as the Napoleon House, which actually is just a few doors down. This is not the Napoleon House, but there was a woman who lived in the French Quarter. Her name was Mrs. May Legrand-Crump. And she wanted the city to buy this building, to fix it up, because she owned a house on the street and it was hurting her bottom line. It was hurting her property values. And so Robert Maestri, who was serving his first term in office as the mayor, agreed to buy it, and they agreed to open it and have it as this museum. So in 1950, it opened as the New Orleans Pharmacy Museum. And it's just like this little gemstone that no one ever really wanted. And it is a beautiful building, not only with the collection inside, but it actually is a very good representation of what a Creole townhouse looked like back in the 1800s. So one of the reasons why I wanted to go there is because it advertises itself as having voodoo medicine. And so I was like, voodoo. Again, remember, my parents took the family to New Orleans since I was a little child. We have visited Marie Laveau's tomb, which I'll talk about. And so I was fascinated with what voodoo medicine they would kind of be showcasing at the Pharmacy Museum. And so when you research voodoo, please know that voodoo is not evil. Voodoo is not black magic. Voodoo actually was what was brought over by West African slaves. It was their religion. It was their religious practices. And so just like with other religious practices that were being consumed by the Catholic Church kind of embraced it. And what came about was this voodoo hyphen Catholicism. And so that's why the Flannery O'Connor quote is kind of relevant to this, is that Flannery O'Connor was very devout. And you might not know that by reading her stories, because she gets a little, man, she's got an imagination. She's a fabulous writer. So it's this voodoo Catholicism that's practiced in New Orleans. And so it's derived by the West African slaves bringing their voodoo religious practices into the New World, into the French New Orleans. And then it involves nature, spirits, and ancestors. And so their core beliefs, this is what they believe, is that God does not interfere in our daily lives. Spirits do. And so that's why they dance, they chant, they play music, and they do this with snakes to perform their ceremonies. And so it captures the imagination. And so people think that it's negative. Voodoo is not negative. There are offshoots of it that are black magic, but voodoo medicine, not dark, not inherently dark, unless the practitioner is dark. So the two key figures of voodoo medicine are Marie Laveau and Dr. John Montanet. And so we're going to start with Dr. John Montanet. He was in the 1800s. He's from Senegal, and he was an African medicine man. And so he came over on the slave ships as a slave. And so he would practice herbal medicine. That's what they had back in the day. And so in New Orleans, they would allow African slaves to come together and celebrate their religion in Congo Square. And so this is a very important neighborhood in New Orleans. And so he would practice, and he was the high priest, the high king, voodoo king. And then a lot of you may be more familiar with Marie Laveau, but Dr. John is really what he was referred to, Dr. John, famous musician from the 70s, Dr. John. He took his name from the original Dr. John. And he actually has June 23rd, this summer, will be his feast day, St. John's Eve, and it is his day of celebration. But more people are familiar with Marie Laveau than Dr. John. Marie Laveau was born either 1794 or 1801. It varies because, ladies don't like to disclose their age, and there aren't documents about it. And so she has been represented more probably in popular culture than Dr. John. And again, going back to American Horror Story, Covens, watch the series. So this is Marie Laveau. And she has an interesting life, to say the least. She was born a free person of color. She had a first husband, Jacques Paris, may or may not have had two children, Marie Angélie and Felicity. And then something happened to Jacques. He disappeared, left, something happened. And what the irony of it is they lived on Love Street, because people went to Marie Laveau for love potions, and she lived on Love Street. And so she then married in 1826 Louis Christopher Dumpsonil de Glapion. I need to take French because I don't speak it well, but she married him. He was a man of money, of means. She had 7 children. 3 died in infancy. 4 went on to survive into adulthood. And her daughter, Marie, took over her practice when she died. Marie Laveau was somebody who listened. She liked to listen. She went to Catholic Mass almost every day, at least weekly. She was a very strict Catholic who practiced voodoo. And so it was this hybrid of religion that she practiced. And so she would create herbal remedies, the gree amulets that she would put herbs in, stones in, and give to people, both she and Dr. John. And so because she got along with people, people knew her and liked her, they would confide in her. And so she would hear things. And, you know, I don't know how legitimate she was, because some of it might have been what she heard, but she was very good at her job, and she was paid very well. She and Dr. John. Dr. John made enough money to buy a house, and then he lost all the money and ended up living with a former wife. But they made a lot of money with their voodoo medicine. Consider also when the pandemic, right? When we had these diseases raging through the colonies and New Orleans, French colony, and then it became, American property and so forth. A lot of quackery medicine, people who went to the quacks, right? The people who were just making it up and didn't know anything about herbal remedies, didn't know anything about plant medicine, herbal medicine. They were actually doing more harm than good to people. Whereas in New Orleans, more people survived these outbreaks because they were going to people like Marie Laveau and Dr. John, because they knew about herbal medicine. Herbal medicine is like old wives' tale, right? You have an old wives' tale of something helping cure something, an upset stomach. Well, they knew that. And so it was just herbal medicine. And so these two were not quackeries and quacks in terms of quack medicine, but they actually saved a lot of people's lives. But I know you've come here for the ghost stories. Oh, but going back, Marie Laveau, her former house in the French Quarter is a gift shop, because, New Orleans. Highly recommend that when you go to New Orleans, you go visit her gift shop, because not only does it have the kitsch kind of touristy type of things, but it also has a lot of artifacts from voodoo medicine and also voodoo Catholicism, so that you can see. And they're very serious, be very respectful in the store. They have some great exhibits that you can look at. So please stop there. So the ghost stories, right? You want to know about the ghost stories. So let's start with the ghost stories. Have you heard about the casket girls? The casket girls. And here's a postcard of what the casket girls would look like. You would have this young fair maiden who is 1, 2, 3, fourth over from the left, so second from the right, with her bag, that's her luggage, with her life possessions in it. And the nun would be waving her off from the orphanage or the nunnery, and she would be going to the new world to be married off. That's what happened. That's what happened. So we have the casket girls, filet à la cassette, which translates to women with suitcases. And cassette actually morphed into casquette, Casquette, which is translated to casket. And so people thought that they were casket girls, when in fact they were just girls with luggage. But their story is so interesting and fascinating. So we are going to start back in time, and we are going to start in 1704 in Mobile, Alabama. So Mobile, Biloxi, and New Orleans, 3 ports, were French colonies, French properties. And so the King of France had a problem. He had a lot of men living in the bayou of Mobile, Alabama, who were single, and they needed wives. They needed a woman to make meals, keep house, and keep the men out of trouble so that they would work hard for the king. And so in 1704, the merchant ship named Pelican set sail full of prostitutes, because the French king wanted to get rid of all of the prostitutes who were sitting in his jail, because he was done taking care of them, which he kind of really wasn't, but he put them on a boat, the Pelican and shipped them off, and they became known as Pelican Girls. And so they got off in Mobile, 1704, and they were married off to these men working in the bayou. And surprise, surprise, it didn't go that well. It went horribly, actually, because they were prostitutes. They were not really used to being tamed by anybody. And so they enjoyed the life just like the men. And so that didn't work out too well. But in Biloxi in 1719, also was having a problem with males who, there weren't a lot of females, needed to be married off. And so the king thought, hey, let's send them some more prostitutes. And so Biloxi got their merchant ship full. And then in 1728, the king finally learned his lesson. And he decided, instead of sending the prostitutes, he was going to send the orphans and the girls at the nunnery. And so they would be packed up, and they would have their cassette would be their luggage, their piece of luggage, which you can see in the middle is their worldly belongings are all inside that little box. The clothes off their backs were all that they had, and they arrived into the New World. 1727, they left France for transport to New Orleans. They arrived in 1728. And when they arrived, they were pale because they had been on a boat. Some of them barely survived the transatlantic trip. So they were pale, they were sickly, and in a new area, which they didn't know, right? And so rumors started to swirl about these strange women. And so they also were married off. The experiment didn't go well. It was a whole different set of problems than the prostitutes, but the king actually stopped the program, and the girls were actually shipped back home. So very few were actually married off. And when they were shipped back home, this story swirled in the lower left-hand corner. That is the Ursuline nuns building, convent. And that it was built in 1751. The Ursuline nuns were who the girls were entrusted to while they were in New Orleans. And so the rumor swirled that up on the third floor, which if you look at the picture, the third floor are the dormer windows, and it's the attic. And so the luggage was stored there. And the rumors were that the luggage became caskets, became larger, and the pale women were actually vampires, and they feasted at night, and they would go through those windows on the dormers, and they really didn't leave to go back to France. And so it said that the Pope blessed the nails that were used to seal off the attic. It was all nailed and closed up. There are modern day pictures where the dormer windows have shutters on them, and those are nailed shut because it's to keep the vampires in so that they don't go out and feast at night. And which it was not true, not true. So because of, the rumors, another offshoot of this came that in 1978, two paranormal investigators, which I think is kind of ironic or kind of interesting in a way, because I don't know in 1978 if really they were calling themselves paranormal investigators, or I think we've attached phrasing and terminology to them. But supposedly there's these two paranormal investigators who either went on a tour of the convent, because you can go on tours, or they were denied access to the attic, didn't go on the tour, and they camped out across the street to watch and get evidence of the casket girls flying out of the dormer windows at night to go feast. And so they're either in the convent or they're across the street. set up their equipment. No one sees them. The next morning, their bodies are drained of blood and they're dead. And it might be that they were found either in the stairwell of the convent or across the street, which is really kind of interesting since if you've ever been into the French Quarter never sleeps. There's always somebody out. So I think that somebody would have seen dead bodies drained of blood laying on the cobblestone street. So maybe they were found in the stairwell. Actually, they weren't. This is an urban legend. And these two unnamed men did not exist. But we have the casket girls. I just love that. Just, their little suitcase turned into a trunk. There is another offshoot of the story that is not paranormal investigators, that it was actually two robbers. Two robbers decided to break into the convent at night, encountered the vampires who killed them, drained them of blood, and left their bodies there. The dormer windows, the reason why they are sealed with the shutters is because New Orleans suffers from weather issues, right? Hurricanes and tropical storms, and that's the attic. So it's not like people are living up there. So the window seals or the window are just really for protection of the building. But yes, but it is interesting because Pope John Paul did visit New Orleans. And so the rumor swirled again after his visit that he had re-blessed the nails that had sealed the attic off. And it's just, people love a good story. And why not? French pale girls who were sickly off of a ship in New Orleans to marry someone she's never seen before. The casket girls. But vampires, right? Excuse me. If you Google and search, a lot of people think that Anne Rice brought vampires to New Orleans. And we have Voltaire, not alive during Anne's lifetime. He said, he is a man who knows everything and who never dies. Actually, New Orleans and Louisiana's first vampire was that guy. Comte Saint-Germain. And he was an aristocrat. He had a lot of money. And I'm trying to get to his page with his name. Where did I put that? There he is. Jacques Saint-Germain. He is from the 1700s. He was a French dude with a lot of money. He was born in 1710. He died in 1784. He was an alchemist. Alchemists are people who can change the properties of a physical item and make it into something else. Most people identify or think of alchemists as turning things into gold, but that's not true. It can be other things. And so there's a really good book series, and of course I can't think of her name. It's fiction cozy mystery, where Gigi Pandian, I think it's Gigi Pandian, one of the authors I read, who has an alchemist, but she's an herbal alchemist because she's taking herbs and turning them into medicine. And oh, by the way, she hasn't died. So stories about Jacques here, stunning little guy, is that he never aged. He looked just like he does in that picture, never aged. And then after his supposed death, people saw him everywhere. Well, I mean, I think that if you put his picture next to some paintings of some other wealthy French guys, they probably all look alike. And so I think people just got confused, but people say that he was a vampire because he spoke 6 languages. People would see him in modern day, and that's the first vampire of Louisiana, this guy, not Anne Rice's vampires, which is kind of interesting because I think that I too thought that Anne brought them, but not. Even before Anne's time, but after Jacques, were the Carter brothers. The Carter brothers, serial killers who were vampires also. So just to give you an idea of where we're at in the pictures, lower left-hand corner is Munch, the artist who did the Scream. He was fascinated by vampires and erotic kind of imagery, and that is one of his works of art. The middle picture is 1906 French Quarter, and kind of gives you an idea of the courtyards. So if you look through the window, that doorway, that would be the street. And so the houses are built onto the street, onto the sidewalk, and then inside interior courtyards are where families would have their private time. And so I don't know what building this is. This is just representational of what one of the buildings would look like in the French Quarter, 1906. But we have John and Wayne Carter, or maybe it's Carson. It depends on where you read it. But these two guys, they're brothers. They worked the docks. And so they were, short, strapping men who offloaded seafood at the docks during the day. But at night, they actually went out and collected people, kidnapped them. And they kidnapped them, would take them back to their apartment where they would tie them up and they would drain their blood. And they would drain the blood almost to death, but not crossing over for some of them. How they were discovered is in 1932. Their apartment was at the corner of Royal and St. Anne in the 800 block. And a young girl, a teenager, was running down the street crying, looking for help, and looked like she had been brutally assaulted. And she told the story about how she was kidnapped. And so she told the police officers of this horrible scene. And the police officers decided they didn't want to go back to the apartment right away because they were afraid it would scare off John and Wayne Carter. And so they waited until they got off their shift from the docks, came home, and then burst in and found 15 victims. 9 of them, or 11 of them rather, 11 of them were dead. 4 survived, including the girl. So so 16 overall, I guess. It depends really on what urban legend you read. But they would have bandages on them. And so the theory was that the brothers would lift the bandages, they would suck the blood, then replace the bandages, and then feast it again the next day. There are some plot holes in the story, obviously, right? Because they lived in an apartment with 15 victims. That's a lot of people to put into an apartment. But and if they were vampires, then how were they working day shifts offloading seafood? I don't know. Then the story progresses that they were tried and convicted of murdering people. And so they were hung, or hanged, actually, that's the proper word, hanged immediately thereafter. And their bodies were then buried in the family vault. So remember, in New Orleans, because New Orleans is below sea level, that people are not buried in the ground, because in the ground is actually water, right? The water tables. And so in New Orleans, you have above ground crypts. And so the story is that they were buried in the family crypt. And a year later, when their uncle died and they opened up the crypt, the bodies were gone. Where'd they go? Well, they say, oh, well, they were vampires, so they just flew off into the night. Bennett says that of the surviving victims, one was named Philippe. And Philippe, himself turned into a vampire. And his diary was found in 1949 when he disappeared, but he chronologized 32 victims, 32 people he had killed and drained their blood because to satisfy his thirst for blood, because he too was a vampire. But not to be outdone, there was another victim who was unnamed. And that surviving victim had 442 victims, right? Which certainly would have made the news. Yeah. But it didn't, because this is all made up. John and Wayne Carter, or John and Wayne Carson, 1930s, didn't exist as serial killers or vampires, not mentioned in any newspapers, not mentioned in any type of log on hangings and executions, because even though it was the or it was the early 1900s, 1930s, they actually kept records, and there are no brothers who were killed. There was nobody by this name, and so this one truly is made up. This is fiction right here, fiction, but it's a good story, right? Yeah, Carter or Carson. Probably the most famous story is the Axeman, right? The Axeman cometh, the Axeman. So the Axeman, one victim stated, "I was sleeping and awoke to see a dark, hulking figure looming over me." The Axeman. So the Axeman, we have some variations of spellings. Axeman, Axeman, or Axman, or Ax hyphen man, depending on the publication or the source that you were reading. The Axeman actually happened. This is a true story. There was a serial killer in New Orleans and Gretna, in the area between 1918 and 1919. It is still unsolved. So there was music, jazz music, that came out. That's the lower left-hand corner. You see the mysterious Axeman's Jazz, Don't Scare Me, Papa. And then you see an image of a father and his daughter in the middle. And the story of the Axeman is, we are in the 1918, the 1919s, and we were in the jazz age in New Orleans, right? Jazz, founded in New Orleans, very important to the city. Go visit the Jazz Museum. If nothing else, visit the Jazz District, because it is beautiful. But there were a series of killings in New Orleans and Gretna, which is one of the parishes outside, where Italian Americans or Italian immigrants were targeted. And so in the middle here, we have an Italian grocer with his daughter, and most of the Italian victims, Italian American or Italian immigrant victims, were also grocers. And they were grocers who sold dry goods. So it had food and hardware store. So it was kind of like, your Kroger / Ace Hardware together. And so they sold axes. And so a lot of them actually were attacked by an axe that was in their store. And so we have some news items, because this made the news. This is all over the news. You can look for images, you can look through old newspaper databases and find a chronology, find articles with the victims. And so we have the Axeman's victims, and in the middle we have Woman Springs sensation in Axe Mystery, and then we have who will be next is the question Italians asking. So it started, if you look at the middle on the bottom, we have Joseph Davis and his wife, who was 4 years ago. So we're at 1915. Italian American couple who were attacked. What is interesting, though, is that a lot of the people, a lot of the victims of the Axeman actually survived. And so we have Tony. And it's interesting because there's variations in his spelling of his last name, Sciambra. So SCHIA or SCIA, and his wife, and they were in the lower 9th ward. And what's interesting is this is actually 4 years ago. Actually, they were attacked in 1912. So this is even earlier. And so then they started noticing the trend, right? So we have Andalina and two sons on Apple Street in 1917. And then we have Joseph Maggio and his wife, Italian grocer. And they were attacked with a razor, a straight edge razor, and he survived, but his wife, Catherine, died. And so we just see this progression. And so then we have Louis Bessemer and Annie Harlot Lowe. They were attacked. Louis was a grocer, and they were attacked by an axe wielding assailant, and they both survived. But what's interesting is that Bessemer probably is the outlier. And the reason why he's the outlier is because Bessemer actually was married to somebody else, not Annie. So he was in New Orleans meeting up with his mistress, and they were attacked. And then the story unraveled quickly that Annie was actually attacked by Louis. And so, and then he turned the axe on himself to fabricate that they were victims of the axeman, when in fact they weren't. This was definitely domestic violence where he was trying to kill off the mistress. And then we have Anna Schneider, which is not listed here. I'll see her on the list. Now, Anna Schneider was in August of 1918. She was 8 months pregnant, and she survived the attack. Sadly, the next one was 1918, later on, 5 days later, where we've got Joseph Romano, his wife, Tonti, which actually was Pauline was her name, and their child, Mary, or I'm sorry, it's not the child. He was the uncle. Pauline and Mary Bruno were his nieces, and he died and they survived. And then the next one is really sad. We've got Charles and his wife, Rosie, and their daughter, 2-year-old daughter, Mary, and Mary died, and Charles and Rosie survived. And then we have Sarah Lawman, and then afterwards we have Steve Boca, who was a grocer. Actually, he was before Sarah. And then we have Mike Pepitone. And all of these listings are people who were attacked. And so during this time period, the Axeman wrote what became to be called the Axeman's Letters. And the Times-Picayune was or still is, the newspaper of New Orleans. And they published his letter unedited, where he wrote to the people of New Orleans and the surrounding parishes and said, if you don't want someone else to die or be attacked, you need to be playing jazz music after midnight. And so the Herald, a competing newspaper, wrote an article that kind of called out the Times-Picayune and said, you are just instilling fear in these people. We don't know if this person who wrote the letter is the actual Axeman. We don't know if it's one person or if it's different people, if this is copycat, and don't do it. But the story goes that people would play jazz music to keep the Axeman away. Like I said, this was unsolved. It still remains unsolved, but there were two suspects. The first one was Joseph Momfrey, and it was either Momfrey or Mumfrey, and he became a suspect, but there wasn't enough evidence to hold him with the crimes. And then there was a more convincing suspect in Frank Doc, D-O-C, that was his nickname, Doc Mumfrey, and 1875 to 1921. And he aligns more with the story because by 1921, the Axeman killings had stopped. but we don't know, right? What we do know is that what they were targeting Italian Americans or Italian immigrants. And so this probably was a crime that was triggered by race and of these immigrants coming into the New Orleans area and setting up businesses, successful businesses, and somebody was not happy. And like I said, fortunately, a lot of people did survive the accident, but we have this kind of romanticized version of this axe man, this lonely guy who just wants to hear jazz music, and he doesn't really mean to wield the axe or razor and to kill people off. And again, some of that is coming from American Horror Stories, right? But I'm going to end with kind of like some irony with this. I don't know if you all know, but you too could own a prop of pop culture history. The axe that was used in The Shining, when Jack Nicholson's character, here's Johnny and he's axing through the door. The axe is actually up for auction. The prop from the movie with some memorabilia there. The auction ends in 2 days on April 29th, and it is expected to fetch between $60,000 and $90,000. So if you have a little bit of cash laying beside you and you're looking for some movie memorabilia from The Shining, one of my all-time favorite horror movies, you can have the axe, which was just the prop, so it might not actually do some damage. Thank you so much. And if there are any questions, you can find me on Twitter, Haunted LIB for Haunted Librarian. I'm not on there as much. I'm more likely to be found on Facebook, but come and see my blogs, thehauntedlibrarian.com, where 1 or 2 of these stories that I shared tonight will actually be in written form so that you can look at them. If you're interested in looking at the unsolved cold cases that I presented, the last time I presented, I do have a couple of those up for perusing.
Yay. Well, you did a ton of research on this. I mean, my gosh.
Isn't it fun?
Not for me. I don't like but but that was brilliant. Pam Wright said these are very interesting, fascinating stories, which they are.
Thank you.
But I just found it very interesting. There were mostly grocers that were getting axed, so like some kind of Italian mafia against grocery store people. But it probably was a race thing, get out of my territory, blah blah blah.
And I think that's what the theory is, because most of the people did not die. Yeah. And so it was more of a threat. If you don't leave, then this is what can happen to you. And maybe next time it will be more serious. And it's just, it's just heartbreaking that the 2-year-old died.
Yeah.
But it is fascinating when you read the newspaper articles about this guy, Louis Bessemer and Harriet. I mean, the story really started to unravel where, and she said, she didn't see the guy, but she was actually hit over the head with an iron too. Ooh. So yeah, so it was just slightly off from what was investigated, that the police kind of looked at her a little bit more, or looked at them a little bit more closely.
I knew something was going on. New Orleans.
They know.
Well, in the beginning with the apothecary, the medicines and things, it's funny how advanced medicines were with just herbs and things back then. Because when I was investigated the Spanish Military Hospital Museum in New Orleans, when you go during the day, you get a tour, and then you sit down for this not very long lecture, but very interesting lecture about how they performed surgeries and things back in like 1500s, 1600s. The Spanish were so advanced medically. I was astounded. They could get someone so high that they could take their leg off and they were just in la la land. I mean, who would have thought? But they didn't do any of that in the Civil War. They just put a piece of cloth in their mouth and whack the legs off. But gosh, I mean, in the 1500s, they were able to do these surgeries and things, and the people never even feel it until, you know, they wake up. I can't remember what the things were that they would use, but I mean, they kept them quite comfortable for the time.
Oh,
It
they
was
did.
fascinating.
And it's interesting because there is a very there's a collection of glass eyes at the pharmacy museum.
Oh wow.
Which kind of creeped me out. But they were putting in glass eyes that looked like as best an eye could look back in those days. And it's just, and so many of it. And that's why, you know, I caution people when I talk about voodoo, and I am not an expert on voodoo.
Yeah.
But I am an expert on knowing that you shouldn't just jump to the conclusion that it's negative. And, you know, and that's unfortunately, it's just so easy to do when you get into something that's attached to religion. But if not for the herbalist,
Yeah.
or the you know, the medicine man, I mean, think of Native American cultures.
Yeah.
They know so much more about herbs, that when these diseases came through, a lot of people survived because they went to the right person.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
You know, I wonder if some of that negativity as far as voodoo got is because, you know, probably a lot of these people were persecuted, you know, a lot of the
Yeah.
religious people, and that they may have led them to believe they could do bad things to them, so they would leave them alone. I wonder if some of that crept in, that added to some of that negative, you know, attachment.
Probably because people do like to tell the story about Marie Laveau on her deathbed, how she just gave up voodoo and converted to Catholicism. And that's not true. She was a Catholic and a voodoo practitioner all through her life. But they make it, you know, because she can't be this, you know, this great person of medicine back then if she wasn't a Catholic.
Yeah. Karen and Daniels, I think the connection between voodoo and Catholicism is interesting. As a really terrible Catholic, I had no idea that they were being practiced sort of simultaneously, which, yeah, I thought one, you know, would definitely not support the other in that case. It's like ghost hunting and being a Baptist. I mean, you know, just doesn't kind of go together.
Right, exactly. But that's why it's so important when you see and you go in, the cathedral in New Orleans is just beautiful, and it's in the French Quarter on Jackson Square, and the ties with Catholicism and the French, and just everything that ties in there. And there, I do have quite a few blogs about New Orleans and different places in New Orleans. And just think of it though, I was talking to somebody over Easter in terms of the Easter basket and eggs. I mean, that has nothing to do with Catholics or Jesus. That has everything to do with getting the pagans on board with, you know, because spring is rebirth. That's when the animals are born. It has nothing to do with the tenets of Catholicism. It was just to get more people converted.
And for Hallmark to make money.
Yes, Cadbury.
Oh, those are good, especially when you put them in the refrigerator. Oh, I think cut them in half. But anyway, not that I've ever done that before. But nobody really has any questions. But so when are you going back to New Orleans? Is that when you bring your daughter home for the?
No, sadly I can't, because her stuff will not fit in the car with two of us driving her.
Gotcha.
So no, Dan's gonna go out and collect her and bring her, but I will be taking her back in August. So I will definitely be back in August at the earliest.
So,
and I'm going to the convent.
Oh yeah, that'd be fun. Just wear some garlic around your neck just in case.
Just in case. And it's just, you know, it's just so funny how New Orleans has so much history. You don't honestly really have to exaggerate it. The truth is stranger than fiction there. And And it's just, it's such a gorgeous city. It's, it's just heartbreaking that, the second hurricane for evacuations this year or school year. And the people there are so nice. The food is fantastic,
That's for sure.
but it's so rich in history that all of these places are just worth visiting.
I did. This has been years ago. Gosh, I don't even know. And I did a ghost tour, and I remember one of the stories was about the woman on the roof. I'm trying to. She was the mistress of a wealthy plantation owner. I'm not sure if you've heard the story, and he had her in a townhouse in town, and would come in and party, and she kept thinking he was going to marry her. This is
Yeah.
and
No, I don't know that one, but there is. I'm gonna open up the folder. Um, um, I have written about the woman who was responsible for the architecture in the French Quarter.
oh,
And she was a wealthy French woman, and she and her husband came over, and she finally was able to get out of the marriage. I'm scrolling down so that I don't butcher her name. Where are you?
well, this story goes. He said, "Well, if you will, go out on the roof and wait till I call you or something, I will marry you afterwards or something." Anyway, he never came and got her, and she froze to death outside on the
Oh,
roof.
that's like a Frozen Charlotte story.
Yeah, and then people see her outside on the roof or something. Yeah,
Yeah.
Peter's digesting that story, but yeah, it was interesting. We went by the townhouse that was supposedly the one where
it all happened.
Yeah, where it all happened.
No, so this one is Michaela Almonester. She actually on another paranormal show, a different one, they were investigating a very good restaurant in New Orleans called Vessel. And she was like a patron to the city of New Orleans and gave a lot of money. She probably was having an affair with what's his name, Andrew Jackson, and she was the party responsible for funding the statue being built in his likeness in Jackson Square. And and so in the Place d'Armes in Jackson Square, but she was the one who brought over the black the wrought iron. Thank you.
Wrought iron,
wrought iron and all of that architecture, all of those architecture things.
Well, that's interesting. I did not know that.
Mm-hmm. So I have a blog on that one too. She's a good story. They're all good stories.
There's a lot of stories there. And there were a couple that I heard on that ghost tour that I went back to visit the locations the next day. And I always question the people working in these places, to get the real scoop, And one of them said, that is absolutely nonsense. That wasn't even this house, blah, blah, blah. It's sometimes you get really disappointed when you find out the truth.
Yeah, it's sad. It's like this bummer.
Yeah, but it makes for good stories. There's a place in St. Augustine. There's a famous video, and it's the downstairs. I think it's like the oldest house in the country. Something I don't remember, but there's a famous video. It's probably still on YouTube, and you see the shadow person going through the basement. Of course, I had to go in there, and he said that was completely debunked, and he told me and showed me. He said it's not true. They just will not say it's not true. I'm like, darn, it's such a good video. He said, yeah, it was somebody on the street. It caused that shadow. Oh yeah. So that's why I tell people you have to use critical thinking. You can't ever take any of these, stories that a client may tell you. This is happening. This is going on. You got to think past that. It's like, what else could be causing this to happen?
I know, but it's just so fun though.
It is fun. And that's why we like to hear about them, because And in our minds, we're seeing it happen as you're telling it. I mean, I'm picturing all of it.
But it is pretty awesome though. And storytelling is so much a part of our essence and soul that, and we just happen to also like embellishing.
Yeah, it's a good story, but that goes back to paranormal investigating. When you're interviewing a potential client, is you have to watch out for those embellishments. And like I said, it flew off the shelf. Well, did it fly off the shelf? Did it tilt over and fall off the shelf? Because people embellish.
Did it really move? Yeah.
Did it really move? Yeah. Did a car go by, a truck, and cause the shelf to jiggle and make it fall? So yeah, we always have to think past what we hear and look into other options. But those were great stories. Now I want to go back, and I like to see the convent. I didn't know that story.
Yes, and that again, that's another place I've been trying to get into. But of course, husband and the daughter are like, we'll be over here. You go there.
And the thing is, it may not. It could be haunted by something completely different, but that has that story. But some of these places are so old, there probably is something there, even if it's residual stuff there.
Totally. And then add, all of the trauma from Katrina.
Oh, geez.
And the devastation from Katrina, and just all of that being, possibly still held there. Yeah. And it's just such a special place. And
water and being an energy conductor, and there's so much water in the ground that could add to paranormal activity. That's another thought.
Mm-hmm. And although I have the Cabillo and the presbytery, the two historic buildings on either side of the cathedral, I can't get anything captured on those when I go.
Huh.
And I think it's just because there might just be so many people back there, there and everything. But behind the cathedral is this beautiful garden. And they have this sculpture of Jesus with his arms outstretched. And some of the pictures that you'll see from the French Quarter are the light hitting it, and it reflects onto the back wall. And that garden, I think, is active.
Take a digital recorder in there, see what you get.
But you can't get inside of it, because it's all, put your hand through the wrought iron, I guess.
Yeah, but when we get EVPs a lot, they sound like they're right up against the microphone, as to where the live people investigators sound further in the distance.
Yeah.
We're noticing that a lot with our latest investigations with our cameras with audio. It's like, it sounds like they're standing right over it and saying the EVP when you can hear us back here. So it's interesting. You could probably stand outside it and still capture things. It's
so cool. Right along Pirates Alley. It's just, I can't wait to go back.
Well, give me
really can't.
Beignets, but none of that strong coffee. That coffee is too much for me. You can stand a spoon up in it. Oh.
Nope, I just stick with the food.
Yeah.
And the desserts and oh gosh, we just eat our way through the whole city. It doesn't matter. It's all good.
Tourism jumping up from this presentation tonight. Well, we're gonna close out early tonight. My allergies are about to send me over the edge.
Sorry.
With the pollen, but anyway, it's the price I pay for the beautiful spring. But next time on May 11th, a look inside Southern Nevada ghost towns by Heather Landon, Dr. Heather Landon, because her book will be coming out, I think, in August, about Southern Nevada ghost towns. So she'll tell you all about it, and I guess how you'll be able to get the book when it comes out. So that'll be fun. I can't think what's after that, though. I forgot to look it up. And if anybody's interested, I'm doing a presentation tomorrow night. It's not on Ghost Ed. It's on one of my medium friends, Winterbrook Ryan, Ryan. If you look up her Facebook page, she's going to be doing a talk with me on scrying, which a lot of people have seen, but I'm going to be focusing on smoke scrying this time with a lot of my smoke scrying images that people haven't seen. So it's just going to be casual fun. I'm going to show some of those and talk about it. So if anybody's interested, tune in tomorrow night. And I forgot what time it is, 8, 9 o'clock, 7 o'clock. I can't remember. Look on my Facebook page.
That's how
It's been a stressful week so far. But anyway, thanks everybody for watching. And I don't think there's any questions. Pam Wright says, thank you both. You're quite welcome. We enjoy it.
Thank you.
And Karen, let me see if I have glasses on. And Daniels, thanks for the stories. Yes, thank you. You always do such a great job and so thorough with your research.
Oh, thank you. I enjoy telling the stories and sharing.
Well, it shows. I appreciate it. All right, everybody. Tell everybody again where they can find you and your blog at the Haunted Librarian.
thehauntedlibrarian.com and on Twitter at hauntedlib, which is short for the Haunted Librarian because you can't have too many letters, but thehauntedlibrarian.com.
Well, great. Everybody, really, you need to go check out. It's beautiful. All right. Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.